Hello, sixth grade. It's good to talk to you again. This lesson is for 9.4 on the percent equation. I don't think that you will find it difficult at all unless you've had trouble in the previous lessons. I am going to do every problem in this lesson using the percent equation, which you will see written in the key concept box on page 465. However, let me say this to you. If you prefer the percent proportion method of solving for percents that we did in 9.2 before spring break, then you just do that. You can do it every time. And I will tell you that when I'm working percent problems, I use the proportion 75% of the time. The only time I would choose to use the percent equation is when it's asking me what, say, 25% of 100 is. And I'll remind you of that when we get to those. But no matter what the directions say on a quiz in your homework, know that you can use the percent proportion equation every time. If it says use the percent equation and you don't like it, just use the percent proportion. Also, feel free to use a calculator. However, if you use a calculator on the quiz or in your homework and you don't write any numbers down and then you type the wrong thing into the calculator, you're going to get the wrong answer, and I'm going to have to take off every single point that the problem is worth. So my advice to you is make sure you know how to set the problems up without a calculator. Write all that down for your work on the quiz, on your homework, and then use a calculator just to do the calculations, okay? If you show me no work, you get no partial credit. All right, let's begin with the key concept again on page 465. So the percent equation is using variables written like this. A equals P percent times B. Now, let me back up a little bit and remind you of what all these variables stand for by going back to the percent proportion. This is what we learned before spring break. A over B equals P over 100. And I told you at that time that A is the part and B is the whole. I also told you that the two hints you could use to know how to set up a percent proportion were the words is and of. Okay. The same thing is true in the percent equation. A is always the part and B is always the whole. Again, if you have the keyword is in your question or the keyword of, you can still refer to those. We're just setting up a different way of looking at it. Now, I'm going to show you something that might seem a little weird. Some of you will get it. If you don't get this part, it's totally okay, but some of you will understand why you can use either percent proportion or percent equation. If I wanted to get A alone, like it is here in the percent equation, but I want to get this A alone, what would I do? How would I get A alone? Remember, in any algebra equation, to solve it, the goal is to get the variable alone. And I'm asking you, how would you get A alone? Well, why is it not alone? Because it's being divided by B, okay? So how can we get A by itself? We can do the inverse operation. We can multiply it to B. But we have to do that to both sides. And when we do, it makes A alone. And the other side looks like P over 100, or P percent times B. And look, that's the same thing as the percent equation. So that's why you can use either one of them to solve any percent question. Okay, now I'm going to clear all this off because it got kind of messy, and then we'll do some examples. Again, as I said when I started, I am going to use the percent equation for all of the problems in this. You do not have to. All right, so I'm going to put that up here at the top. Whoops. A equals P percent times B. And let's look at the fundraising question. Your class has raised 80% of its goal, 80% of $8,000. All right. The question is, how much money has your class raised? They've raised 80% of 8,000. So what is 80% of 8,000? I'm going to set it up with the percent equation. Remember, is my keyword for of. I'm sorry, for A, and of is my keyword for B. So what is, that's what we're looking for. What part is 80% of 8,000? So A is what we're solving for. 80% times 8,000. Now, hopefully you're really tracking with me here, and you should see an error, a mistake, something I haven't done yet. I'm trying to figure out what 80% of 8,000 is, not what 80 times 8,000 is. So when I'm moving to use the calculator to solve this, I'm not going to type in 80 and hit the percent key, okay? And we talked about this before spring break. I'm either going to write 80% or I'm going to change it to a decimal. So when I get to this point, when I get to where I'm going to go into the calculator, I need to change this to 0.8. Okay, and you will see that in example 1 because they've spelled out the solution for you. All right, so into my calculator, I would type 0.8 times 8,000, and I would get 6,400. So I would know that the class has raised $6,400 for the trip. Okay, this is the main sticking point or trick to using the percent equation, is remembering that you have to change this percentage into a decimal before you do the calculation. All right, let me clear this one off and we'll try one that doesn't have the answer there. So I'm going to now go and do guided practice 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you want to pause it and solve, then that's what I recommend. You pause the video, you solve number 1, and then you turn it back on and see if you got the correct answer. All right. So number 1 says, what number is, so that's going I'm solving for A, 20% of or times 110. That's B, okay? So I'm going to change 20% to a decimal. I'm going to multiply it to 110. Notice that I wrote down what I am going to put into my calculator so that the teacher sees I know how to solve this, okay? And I have my calculator here to the side. 0.2 times 110 equals 22. And that's what you should have gotten, okay? The other 3, 2, 3, and 4 are set up the exact same way. So for example, in number 2, A equals 0.25 times 88. When you work that out, you will get 22. I'm going to tell you the answers for 3 and 4, so if you want to pause it and work them out, do that now. The answer to number 3 is 60, and the answer to number 4 is 600. I have to work on a timer. I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to work out the rest of those since they're so similar. I want to make sure I cover anything that might be difficult in the chapter, in this lesson. All right, so I'm skipping over to example 2. And basically on examples 2 and 3, they are just solving for a different variable, not A anymore. So you will see in example 2, it says what percent of 150 is 90, all right? So let's work that out. We're still using the percent equation today. Again, you can use the proportion if you want. What percent, so that's what I'm going to be solving for, is this P variable, okay? What percent of 150, so that's my base, is 90. so that you would set it up like this. Now, let me rewrite it so it looks familiar to you. You have solved equations that look like this before. Remember, the goal is to get the variable, in this case p, alone. How will we do that? It's multiplied to 150, so I'm going to do the inverse operation. I'm going to divide both sides by 150. Again, I've written out my work so the teacher sees how I'm solving it. And into my calculator, I type 90 divided by 150, and I get 0.6. So P equals 0.6. Now, hopefully, you're kind of seeing a connection to the one we did earlier. When we were solving for A, we had to change this percent into a decimal. And look, here the answer is in decimal form, so I need to change it back to a percent. And we've already had a lesson on changing decimals to percents. I'm just going to drop that decimal point 2 places to the right. And the percent, in the question, what percent of 150 is 90? The answer would be 60%. Okay, again, that one's worked out for you at the top of 466. All right, I think I have time for finding B, and then I'm probably going to do a second video so that we can go through some of the examples in the text. So, dropping down to example 3, the number 117 is, so 117 is 45%. I'm going to go ahead and change it to a decimal so I can know what to type into my calculator. Of what number? So in this one, we're solving for B instead of P. And again, you should recognize from even the last problem that we did that you're going to divide both sides by 0.45. Okay? So, have my work shown, and into my calculator, I'm going to type 117 divided by 0.45 because I had to change my percent to a decimal, and I get 260. So, let me say a note here because I have a minute or two about just making sure that your answer makes sense. So let's go back and look at the question to this one that we just did in example 3. It says the number 117 is 45% of, and I just solved that the answer should be 260. So I'm going to ask myself, does this make sense? Is it possible that 117 could be 45% of 260? Well, there's a way to kind of check this one. 45 is really close to 50. Is 117 about half of 260? Well, hopefully you can see that half of 260 would be 130. And I'm just shy of that. I'm only 13 away from 130. So I'm going to say yes, that makes sense. Now, just to kind of show you what I'm talking about, what if I had come up with 160? What if I had hit the wrong key in the calculator, okay? I would get partial credit because I showed all my work right here, but I still wouldn't get the right answer. So I'm going to stop and say, does this make sense? Can 117 be almost half, be 45% of 160? Well, half of 160 would be 80. So I have exceeded 45% at 117 if I'm trying to get to half of 160. So that's just a word of caution to you, of advice. After you solve a problem, throw your answer back up into the question and make sure that it makes sense, because you'll be able to catch careless errors that way. Again, like I said, what if your finger hits the wrong key on the calculator? You won't know if you don't go back and check. All right, I am running out of time, so I'm going to stop there and I'll pick up again in the next video.